My older brother, Daniel, showed up out of the blue and demanded that I give him my house so he and his pregnant wife could live in it. When I refused, he attacked me with brass knuckles, leaving me bruised and bleeding. Now, Daniel is in jail, and I'm recovering from the attack. But honestly, Daniel has been ruining my life for as long as I can remember, and our parents always refuse to see it because he's their golden child. I've left town to start over, but it feels like my past is still haunting me. How do you even begin to heal from something like this? Maybe writing this all down will help. Or maybe I just need to hear someone tell me I'm not crazy for feeling like I've been trapped in a twisted version of reality for the past 25 years. Either way, this story has weighed on me for too long, and it's time to get it out. Let me give you some backstory. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, and my family was no exception. There was me, my older brother Daniel, and our parents, who have always had a very selective vision when it came to their precious firstborn. Daniel was their golden child, plain and simple. If he got into trouble at school, it was always the teacher's fault. If he stayed out too late, my parents would brush it off, saying, "Boys will be boys." And if he did something really wrong, like break something or throw a tantrum at the age of 17, they'd always find a way to blame me. "Why did you upset Daniel?" they'd ask, like I was somehow responsible for his inability to control his temper. And speaking of his temper, Daniel's anger was like living with a time bomb. One minute, everything would be calm, and the next, he'd explode. His anger wasn't just about shouting or slamming doors. When Daniel got angry, he hit, and he hit hard. And for some reason, I was always his favorite target. I'm 4 years younger than Daniel, so you can imagine what that looked like when we were kids. It started off as little things, pushing me around or knocking stuff out of my hands. At first, I thought it was just normal sibling roughhousing, but it quickly escalated. By the time I was in middle school, Daniel wasn't just shoving me around anymore. He was throwing punches, kicking me, and using whatever he could grab to hurt me. It was relentless. There was one time I'll never forget. I was 13, and Daniel was a senior in high school. He got mad at me because I accidentally took one of his video games without asking. He stormed into my room, shut the door, and beat me so badly I could hardly see out of one eye. I was covered in bruises. I thought this would finally be the moment my parents realized how out of control he was, but when I went to them and told them what happened, they looked at each other and then at me. My mom said, "What did you do to provoke him?" I was speechless. This had always been their response. No matter what Daniel did, I was somehow at fault. It was never Daniel who had to apologize or be responsible for his actions. It was me who had to keep the peace, me who had to forgive and move on. I was invisible to them unless it was about managing Daniel's temper. As the years went on, I got better at hiding the bruises, but the emotional scars stayed. I stopped inviting friends over, terrified they'd see what was really happening. I focused on school, determined to be the perfect student in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, my parents would notice me. I got straight A's, joined clubs, and became the model son. But no matter what I did, it was always Daniel who came first. He could do no wrong in their eyes. The breaking point came in my high school graduation. It was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. I was valedictorian, and I had worked so hard to get there. Daniel had been away at college, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he would come to support me for once. But when he showed up, I should have known better. We were having a small gathering after the ceremony, just family and a few close friends. I was feeling proud, like all my hard work was finally paying off. Then Daniel pulled me aside. He had this smug, knowing look on his face. "Congrats on the speech," he said sarcastically. "Too bad your life's going downhill from here." Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise, leaned in close, and whispered, "You'll never be as good as me. Don't even bother trying." I was 18 at the time, technically an adult, but even then I couldn't stand up to him. Fear kept me silent, just like always. That night, I decided I couldn't live in that house anymore. I had to get out. As soon as I graduated, I applied to colleges as far away from home as possible. When I got into a school 500 miles away, I packed my bags and left without looking back. I didn't tell anyone goodbye. I just needed to escape that. University life was supposed to be my fresh start. I moved into a small dorm, away from my family, away from Daniel. At first, it felt like freedom, but even though I was physically away from him, the damage he had done still haunted me. I couldn't shake the anxiety, the constant feeling that something terrible was going to happen. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced Daniel was going to show up and hurt me. I couldn't fully relax. The emotional scars ran too deep. Even when I was doing well, making friends, joining clubs, excelling in my classes, there was always this nagging feeling of inadequacy. I kept thinking about how my parents never asked about me. Every time I called home, it was, "Oh, Daniel's doing great. Daniel's been promoted. Daniel bought a car." It was like I didn't exist unless they needed something. Then came the job search after college. I applied everywhere, but the rejection letters kept piling up. My confidence took a hit. Meanwhile, my parents were less than understanding. "Maybe you're just not trying hard enough," they'd say. It was as if no matter how hard I worked, I could never measure up. That's when I decided to move even further away, to start fresh. I found a job in a new city, rented a small house, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally putting my past behind me. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and I was good at it. I even made some close friends like Emily and Lucas, who became my support system. Life was finally starting to feel normal. But then, out of nowhere, Daniel came crashing back into my life. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was relaxing at home when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was just a package delivery. But when I opened the door, there was Daniel, standing there with a smug grin. And next to him was a woman, his pregnant wife, Sarah. "Hey, Marcus," Daniel said, walking in like he owned the place. "Nice house. Much better than where we're living." I was stunned. I hadn't seen or spoken to him in years. Now here he was, acting like we were best friends. I tried to stay calm, but I knew something was off. "We need more space," Daniel continued. "Sarah's due in a couple of months, and we can't raise a kid in our crappy apartment. This house would be perfect for us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was actually asking for my house. "No," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're not taking my house." Daniel's smile disappeared. "I wasn't asking," he growled, stepping closer. "You're going to give me this house. You owe me." That's when he pulled out brass knuckles and punched me in the ribs. The pain was immediate and excruciating. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. But he didn't stop. He kept hitting me over and over, while Sarah stood frozen in shock. I don't know how long it lasted, but by the time it was over, I was barely conscious. Daniel spat at me. "You should have just given me the house," before storming out with his wife. It wasn't until my friends Emily and Lucas came by that anyone found me. They rushed me to the hospital, where I was treated for broken ribs, a concussion, and countless bruises. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. Emily and Lucas stayed by my side through it all, but it was Lucas who convinced me to press charges. At first, I wasn't sure. Daniel was still my brother. But as I lay in that hospital bed, I realized I couldn't let him get away with it. The court case dragged on for months. Daniel, of course, denied everything, claiming he was defending himself. But the evidence was overwhelming, and in the end, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for aggravated assault. Even with Daniel locked up, I struggled to move on. The physical wounds healed, but the emotional scars were harder to shake. My parents tried to apologize, but it was too late. They had enabled Daniel's behavior for too long, and their apologies felt hollow. They had chosen to look the other way for years, and now, when it was too late, they wanted to make amends. After Daniel was sentenced, I moved even further away. I decided to start fresh in a new city where no one knew me or my family's baggage. I wanted to leave the past behind and build a life where I wasn't constantly haunted by the shadow of my brother. I found a cozy little apartment in a quiet neighborhood and took a job in marketing with a small startup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a fresh beginning. For a while, life seemed peaceful. I was away from the constant drama, the toxic family dynamics, and the lingering fear of Daniel showing up unexpectedly. My friends, Emily and Lucas, stayed in touch, and I even started making new friends at work. It felt like finally I was moving forward, but healing from years of abuse and emotional neglect isn't as easy as just picking up and leaving. The scars Daniel left on me ran deep, and they didn't just disappear because he was locked up. I'd wake up some nights in a cold sweat, reliving the moment he attacked me. The brass knuckles, the sound of his fist hitting my ribs, it was all burned into my memory. Sometimes, when I was walking down the street, I'd catch a glimpse of someone who looked like him, and my heart would race. I'd have to remind myself that Daniel was in jail, that he couldn't hurt me anymore. But the fear was still there. Even though I was physically free, I was still trapped by the emotional toll he had taken on me. There were days when I'd feel worthless, like no matter how much I achieved, it would never be enough. I still carried the weight of all those years of being the other child, the one who was ignored, overlooked, and blamed for things I couldn't control. I went to therapy for the first time in my life after the attack. My therapist, Dr. Collins, was kind and patient, and for the first time, I felt like someone truly understood what I had been through. We talked about the years of abuse, about my parents' constant favoritism, and how that had shaped me into someone who always doubted themselves. I told her about the attack, how it felt like the culmination of a lifetime of being pushed around, both physically and emotionally. She helped me realize that Daniel wasn't just a bully. He was someone who thrived on control. For years, he had controlled my life with his violence, and even when I left home, he still had a hold over me emotionally. The attack wasn't just about taking my house. It was about trying to assert dominance, to remind me that, in his eyes, I would always be the weaker one. But for the first time in my life, I had stood up to him. I had pressed charges. I had taken control of my own life. And that was something no one could take away from me. The healing process was slow, but over time, I started to rebuild myself. I focused on work, pouring myself into my projects at the marketing firm. My boss, Jake, was impressed with my creativity and work ethic, and within a year, I was promoted to a managerial position. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was succeeding on my own terms, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone else, but because I wanted to die. Emily and Lucas came to visit me in my new city, and we celebrated my promotion with a quiet dinner. They had been my rock through everything, and I knew I owed a lot of my strength to their unwavering support. But the biggest breakthrough came when I decided to confront my parents. For years, they had ignored my pain, had refused to see Daniel for who he really was, and had turned a blind eye to the abuse I had suffered. I needed them to acknowledge what had happened, not just for me, but for my own healing. I wrote them a letter detailing everything, every instance of abuse, every time they had ignored it, and how their refusal to see the truth had hurt me deeply. I told them about the attack, about Daniel's imprisonment, and how I had moved away to start over. I made it clear that I wasn't writing the letter for forgiveness or reconciliation, but to finally be heard. Weeks passed before I got a response. When it finally came, it wasn't what I had expected. My mother wrote back, saying that she and my father were devastated by what had happened and that they had been in denial for years. She admitted that they had failed me, that they had been so blinded by their love for Daniel that they couldn't see the damage he was doing. She apologized for everything, for not protecting me, for not believing me, and for putting Daniel's needs above mine. She said that they had started seeing a counselor themselves, trying to work through their own guilt and denial. It wasn't the perfect apology, and it didn't erase the years of pain. But it was something. It was a small step toward healing, not just for me, but for them as well. I didn't rush back into a relationship with my parents. Trust takes time to rebuild, and I wasn't sure if I could ever fully trust them again. But knowing that they were finally seeing the truth, that they were at least trying to understand what I had been through, brought a small sense of closure. As for Daniel, he remains in prison. I haven't seen him since the trial, and I have no intention of ever speaking to him again. He was my brother, but he had crossed too many lines. Some wounds, I've learned, can never be healed, and some relationships can't be salvaged. But despite everything, I've come out stronger. I've built a life for myself, one that isn't defined by my past or by Daniel's shadow. I'm still working through the trauma, still learning how to trust and love myself, but I'm getting there. Slowly but surely, I'm finding peace. And in the end, I realize that healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a journey, one that requires patience, self-compassion, and the support of people who truly care. I may never fully forget what Daniel did to me, but I'm no longer defined by it. I'm moving forward one step at a time, and for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future.